Somebody turned off the auto
Yeah,
start.
I do that every time. It drives me nuts that you leave it turned on that way.
Okay, give me a reason why you don't like that on.
Because I like testing. I like testing OBS as well.
Oh, so that you can see the stream before you actually go live. Okay.
So,
So we weren't
Majid,
live. So that's cool.
how many spare rooms do you have?
Me?
Yeah, you.
Technically one.
So what
There's a
we'll
garage
do,
as well.
we can build some of those bunks like they have in the
Yeah.
submarines.
We'll
I was just thinking, yeah,
we'll be there next week.
some hammocks hanging off the bulkhead. Yeah,
Come on down. Mikasa Sukasa, especially if you can improve this place.
You can improve your networking.
Yes. Fix my NAS. Get my Plex server running, finally.
Yeah, I can do that. I can probably do that.
Are
From
you
here.
still having trouble with that?
I still haven't been bothered to do it, is the short answer.
Yeah.
Oh, well, it's in my wanderings. I'll talk about it.
Okay.
I had to cut my wandering short. I've done so much in the last couple of weeks that I'm saving some of it for next time. So I think I'm talking about most of the physical stuff I did this time, and I'm going to talk about most of the technical stuff next time.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, my wanderings, considering that I've been away for a month, are quite crap, really, to be honest. It makes me think, how is it that I'm always overwhelmed, but when I actually sit down and look at it and write it down, I haven't actually done much.
You're a doctor. You're busy doing other crap. You got kids.
Well, yeah, there is that.
Give me a little bit of gain,
I hope you.
Joe, if you can.
Oh, you want me to turn it up?
Yeah, if you can.
Yeah, I can do that.
Just a bit.
Only...
You're kind of quiet compared to everybody
Is that
else.
better?
Yeah, that's good.
Test 1 2 3 1 2 3.
Yeah.
Is there free food here? Where's the free food?
It's the best thing I could think of.
Hey, Moss,
free
how's it
food
going?
is always the way.
Right. I was told there'd be snacks.
Well, my groceries are
I
being
just-
delivered as we speak, so that's probably coming through the microphone.
I just had some homemade protein coffee flavored ice cream.
Seriously,
It
guys.
was
Oh, nice.
incredible.
That sounds great.
Awesome. And now I'm having a monster. I expect to be vibrating through the chair here in a little bit.
Nice.
So it's not even 15 minutes in, and we've talked about somebody's rack. We've talked about somebody being gorgeous, and now we're talking about
Yeah, but none of that
vibrations.
was broadcast.
It wasn't.
Now you just have to bring up my rack.
All right.
Speaking of racks, I was at the gym today. Man, I managed to do a 90-minute workout in 3 hours. Flipping heck.
That sounds about right. No. When you get older, you got to spread that workout out a little bit more to get the same amount of volume in. Trust me on this.
My problem used to be, and it's one of the reasons I don't go to the gym anymore, because they put TVs in the gyms, and I get.
That's what the treadmill's for.
I know, but I'm always wanting to look at the thing on this TV over here and not the one in front of me. So I get off the treadmill and I walk over there because it's always something more
Some of the
interesting.
places have treadmills that have their own TV. Like each
Yes.
one has its own
Yeah.
TV.
And that's probably how it is nowadays, actually. Or people probably just use their phones. It's been a while since
I'd take my tablet.
Yeah.
I think
I mean,
there's a show today,
why
isn't
not?
there?
Is there?
Oh, that's
No.
something I could probably talk about in my wanderings. I did get a new tablet at work, and it's ridiculous. An 11-inch
great.
tablet.
Let's get to it
that.
then, yeah?
I'm going to do a 3,
Yeah.
2, 1, and then 20 seconds. So,
All right, who's hosting?
me. 3, 2, 1. Like every can of soup that is at the store is being dropped on my kitchen floor.
It's not coming across.
Okay,
I can't
good.
hear any of it. so-
I can't hear it.
That's alrighty then. Episode 454. Welcome to mintCast, the podcast by the Linux Mint community for all users of Linux. This is episode 454. This is episode 454.5. Recorded on Sunday, February 2nd, 2025.
Debating migrating, I'm Joe.
Hopelessly behind schedule, I'm Bill.
Unfolded, I'm Majid.
And just here for the free snacks, I'm Eric.
First up in the news, Solus 4.7 released. Facebook bans Linux. Wine 10 released. Risk 5 stuff. Or is that a Risk V? I don't know. And
It's a 5.
Okay. And cursing at your AI is the way forward. In security and privacy, judge says controversial FBI searches require a warrant. Then on our wanderings, Joe builds things. Bill butters his mint. Yeah, that doesn't sound as good out loud as it did on paper. Majid likes cursing at his computer. In our innards section, we have a little discussion about, what is it, guys?
Nuke and pave
versus
Nuke and
update path.
update in place.
Versus trying to upgrade, yeah.
Yeah.
Especially with the new 22.1 having just come out.
Right on. And finally, the feedback and a couple of suggestions. Please remember, if you want to follow along with our discussions, the full show notes for this episode are linked in the show's description. Well, and it's got written here at mintcast.org. That doesn't really fit. It's in the show's description on the YouTube and on the whatever podcast player you use. First up, the news. Eric?
All right. Solus 4.7 is released. This is from the Solus blog via Londoner. Last Sunday, January 26th, the Solus team proudly announced their latest release, Solus 4.7 Endurance. This is a quote. This release focuses on updating our additions and refreshing the default kernels. We've called this release Endurance to highlight our promise to users that we will continue to deliver timely updates to keep their systems stable and beautiful, end quote. The release is available with the Budgie desktop and 3 other editions. Solus ships with Budgie 10.9.2. The latest release of the Budgie desktop, the mature 10.9.x series, brings some small improvements and builds on Budgie's reputation for stability and polish. Solus GNOME Edition ships with GNOME 47.3, an update to the GNOME 47 Denver series. Features added in GNOME 47 include accent colors, enhanced small screen support, screen capture hardware encoding, faster, more accurate GTK rendering, new open and save file dialogues. Solus 4.7 Plasma Edition ships with the latest Plasma desktop, KDE Frameworks, KDE Gear, and the KDE branch in Qt. The XFCE edition has been updated to version 4.20. This is a big milestone for the XFCE project. It brings very experimental support for Wayland. All the editions feature Firefox 134.0.2, LibreOffice 24.8.4.2, and Thunderbird 128.6.0. For audio and video multimedia playback, Solus offers software out of the box that caters specifically to the desired experience for each edition. Budgie and GNOME editions ship with Rhythmbox for audio playback and the latest release of the alternate toolbar extension to provide a more modern user experience. I haven't used that. Budgie and GNOME ship with Celluloid for video playback. XFCE ships with Parole for multimedia playback. Plasma ships with Elisa and audio playback and for audio playback, and Hurana. I haven't heard of some of these for video playback. Solus encourages users to try one of the new software centers as a replacement for the Solus SC or Solus Software Center. A new software center gets you out-of-the-box support for Flatpaks and better app descriptions through AppStream metadata support. Solus contributors and staff have been hard at work adding and fixing the metainfo.xml files, for used for AppStream support. The goal is for every packaged GUI application to have a working metainfo.xml file so that the software centers can show users all kinds of information about an app before they decide to install it. Curious Budgie, GNOME, and XFC users can install GNOME software, while Plasma users should install Discover. The ISO images now include firmware support for more NVIDIA GPUs out of the box. Some users with 4000 series cards were seeing black screens when trying to install Solus. This should now be fixed. That's a whole bunch of stuff.
Anybody
And
use
a lot of it's
Solus
refreshed.
recently?
Man, I haven't looked at Solus since before Ike left the project.
What packaging format do they use for their apps? Are they all in on Flatpak, or they've got their own
They
thing?
got their own thing.
Yeah, because
Yeah,
if I remember
SAG
correctly, they weren't Deb or
No.
No, it's from source.
RPMs, were they?
Yeah, it's from source, so they've created their own thing. I can't remember what the extension is for it at this point, but yeah, and they have their own software center, which is I can see why they wanted to include these XML files to give a richer experience to see what you're installing, because it was really just sort of a line item. At least that's what I remember it being. So this sounds like maybe they've improved some of that. And, a lot of it's sort of refreshing. So probably, the latest hardware support, and then just basically the latest versions of everything. So it's funny, though, with media software, AV software, how they'll shift it in and out. And some of this stuff, like literally, I've never heard of. So
It gets real opinionated with media software because
yeah,
you're really just getting somebody's favorite, when
gotcha.
and they're making a point to have different media software depending on the version, the desktop that it ships with, which is
Right.
Which I don't know. I suppose there's a good argument for using Qt stuff on the Plasma version, but I don't know. I think for anything GTK, probably what they call celluloid, what used to be GNOME, MPV, GNOME MPV, and now it's called celluloid. It's probably the best player out there as long as it's up to date. But I don't know. It gets opinionated, and
I don't know why people just don't stick with VLC, because VLC.
That's what I was just gonna say. I use VLC too.
yeah,
because I use VLC on everything. In
It's
fact.
one of the first things I install.
me
Yeah.
too. I don't know. It seems I remember a time when it was tough to get other players to play video files with all the different codecs and things, and VLC
The dependencies
was just,
and stuff were
yeah,
always,
and you didn't always know what dependencies to put on there, and DRM and whatnot, and VLC was just the way to get it working without any effort whatsoever,
That's it. No messing around. You just install
because
it.
I just want to watch the thing,
Yeah.
I don't.
I haven't tried Solus, but I did try Budgie on Ubuntu Budgie. I think around the time of the LTS, so about this time last year, maybe. And I kind of didn't see the point.
It's fine.
It was fine. It was a perfectly functional desktop.
Yeah.
But I didn't know what it was. And this could be just my ignorance, but I didn't know what it was bringing to the table that something like Cinnamon or Mate or hell, even XFCE.
I think it goes back to when it was created. So GNOME at that point, whenever they forked it off, almost like the same thing with Cinnamon. Like they had just gotten to a point where they were unhappy with the stock GNOME experience, and so they essentially took that, and then I always felt like, and this is probably unfair because it has gotten much more integrated, it sort of felt like at first GNOME with a bunch of stuff stuck on top of it, the Raven panel and some of the other things, like they were just sort of custom extensions. That's what it felt like, at least. So I know that because it's a source distribution, it was more about a custom desktop for the whole distribution. If you use it on a different distro, I'm not saying it's any different, but it was sort of a package, right? You've got Budgie and Solus, kind of like Cinnamon Mint, right? they didn't even offer alternate desktops, I think, at first. I think they only had Budgie to start. Maybe I'm misremembering
I think you're right.
that, but
And I think you're right. I think there was a culture at the time of everybody jumping ship from the GNOME thing and like, well, GNOME 2 is not going to be a thing. It's time to take what we can about GNOME and make something what we think is better. And then it's just these separate desktops have evolved.
So basically, so they were doing a Cinnamon / Mint thing, except except I suppose in one sense they were going even deeper and completely, divorcing anything to do with Ubuntu and Debs and everything out of it completely.
Well,
yeah. From the underpinnings, absolutely the base, but Budgie definitely leans heavily on GNOME, though. I feel like much more than something like Cinnamon, even though Cinnamon's using a lot of the internals. It doesn't remind me of GNOME at all, versus Budgie just feels like GNOME with stuff, with like more stuff.
True. But then, Cinnamon has been around in some way, shape, or forms for 12 years, 13 years, 2012, I vaguely remember. And so, I suppose if you were to then dial it back, if Budgie's been around for what, maybe 5, 6? So it's earlier on.
More than that.
A little longer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You think? Okay.
Yeah. Because
Let me see.
It's been more than 5 years ago since he was on Late Night Loud talking on Linux Luddites with Resington and them about Budgie and that was back in 2016, actually. So almost 10 years, I want to say. And 2013, yeah. And that's right about the time that everybody was...
Well, first public version was almost 11 years to the day, not to the day. It's February 17th, 2014. So a couple weeks, and then, that's a lot longer. I was saying this last night that everything to me seems like it was 5 years ago.
Yeah.
And and none of it is. Everything's 15.
Well, I mean, if you think about it, 5 years ago is when the pandemic started. I mean, that's just nuts.
That's crazy.
Anyway, we better move.
Yeah, let's move on. Facebook bans Linux. And this is from Distro Watch Weekly Issue 1106. The Londoner. Starting on January 19th, 2025, Facebook's internal policy makers have decided that Linux is malware and labeled groups associated with Linux as being cybersecurity threats. Any posts mentioning DistroWatch and multiple groups associated with Linux and Linux discussions have either been shut down or had many of their posts removed. DistroWatch says it's been hearing all week from readers who say they can no longer post about Linux on Facebook or share links on DistroWatch. Some people have reported their accounts have been locked or limited for posting about Linux. The sad irony here is that Facebook runs much of its infrastructure on Linux and often posts job ads looking for Linux developers. Unfortunately, there isn't anything DistroWatch can do about this. I need some fact checking on this one. I'm not real comfortable with this. Apart from advertising,
it happened, but they fixed it.
Okay,
I think it is something because I've seen this news in a couple of other outlets as well.
Okay.
About so I think it's and the irony of a lot of Facebook being run on Linux servers isn't lost on a lot of people who've been commenting on it.
It almost makes it sound a bit ridiculous.
Seems completely politically minded. Completely.
Yeah. Kissing the ring.
I don't know. I'm still with Bill on this one. Just because you've seen it on a couple different websites, I don't know.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and finish though, but know that we're reading this because it's something that's been passed on to us. Unfortunately, there isn't anything DistroWatch can do about this, apart from advising people to get their Linux-related information from sources other than Facebook. They have tried to appeal the ban and were told the next day that Linux-related material is staying on cybersecurity filter. The writer's Facebook account was also locked for his efforts. DistroWatch went through a similar experience when Twitter changed its name to X. Suddenly, accounts which had been reposting news from our RSS feed, were no longer able to share links. This sort of censorship is an unpleasant side effect of centralized communication platforms such as X, Facebook, Google+, and so on. And there the shoe just dropped. In an effort to continue to make it possible for people to talk about
I can't
Linux.
believe somebody referenced Google Plus in 20.
When's the
Yeah.
last
I was just
time
gonna
you
say the
thought
same
about
thing, like-
Google Plus.
Yeah,
that's a
Seriously?
really weird statement. Yeah.
So,
All right.
mm,
We may be
that's-
debunking something.
we might. Okay, so in an effort to, and then there's some comments in the YouTube live stream. I'll look at that in a minute. In an effort to continue to make it possible for people to talk about Linux and DistroWatch as well as share their views and links, they're providing two options. There are RSS news feeds, which get updates whenever they post new announcements, stories, and the weekly newsletter. They also now have a Mastodon account where they will start to post updates, or at least for new distributions and notice of our weekly newsletter. Over time, we may also add news stories and updates about releases. Links for the feeds and the Mastodon account can be found on the DistroWatch contact page. And yeah, in the comments, it looks like both, per Paul Bunt, both ZNet and Bleeping Computer ran the story.
Yeah, I'm sure I saw Nick on My Linux Experiment. It was on his podcast as well.
That's a bit out there, isn't it? So, I mean, this really feels like
it could just be Harlan's razor. You know, do not ascribe to my list that which can be adequately described by incompetence.
Well,
Somebody
it
just might be
absolutely
really
is.
crap.
It,
You know,
and they were
and, you know,
plugging plugging Mastodon awfully hard too there towards the end, so it started to feel kind of
Yeah.
like a opinion piece. But you know, it apparently the
It is
story
entirely
is,
possible too that this posts the content, because we're not nothing. There's no examples. There's no citations. There's no like distro watch. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know. It just feels a little shaky to me. So if we're wrong, fine. We'll own up to it. But this just seems a little.
well, at least it's something that's going. It is something that's going around on that internet type thing. So even if
Yeah,
it's
but
not
this is
true,
this is
even
is
if it's
just
not
as
true,
easily. Yeah,
I'm just saying, even if
yeah.
it's not true, at least we're talking about something that's a current discussion point.
The mintCast
Yeah,
is
fair enough.
still on Facebook.
I just posted this show on Facebook about an hour ago. So
Yeah, it just seems spurious. Like there probably were some examples of something happening that someone maybe took out of context. Whatever. We've spent enough time on it.
yep, we sure have.
All right. So Wine 10 release brings new drivers, features, and changes. This is from OMG Ubuntu. A fresh, stable release of Wine, the open source compatibility layer that makes it possible to run Windows apps and games on Linux and Mac OS, has been uncorked. More than 6,000 changes were distilled in Wine 10.0, changes collected, collated, and curated over the past 12 months of Wine 9.x development releases. For those who have supped the dev cycle builds, his articles are always fun to read. The bulk of what's new in Wine 10.0 will be familiar. Wine is not the everyday essential it was in the past years. Back then, web-based services weren't as capable, so folks were wedded to specific pieces of Windows software, making Wine an indispensable, if often guilty, aid to day-to-day Linux desktop use. Today, the software remains widely used in the Linux gaming scene, where it's integral to Valve's Proton and CodeWeaver's crossover. Its use for desktop software has lessened, although Linux distributions like Zorin OS do integrate it. The newest stable release brings a sweet bouquet of new features, drivers, and improvements, expanding architecture coverage, and fixes bugs, a vintage that proves Wine truly does get better with age. Why did I pick this article? All right. Wine 10.0.
You're
new
doing
features,
great,
strong.
Eric.
Yeah, thank you. You're glad I picked it, right? Oh goodness.
You want me to
Strong-armed.
continue with the rest of it?
No, I'm just.
I don't have
joking.
much to read here.
Do you? Okay, good.
Wine is not an emulator, literally what the name wine stands for, but it sure does act like one. Being able to run 64-bit x86 apps on ARM systems is a big lure as ARM-based PCs become ever more commonplace. So Wine 10.0 implements an x86 emulation interface in its ARM builds. This, devs say, takes advantage of the ARM64EC support to run all of the Wine code as native with only the application's x86 64 code requiring emulation. The catch is that no emulation library is provided with Wine, but external libraries can be used. Additionally, Wine 10.0 amps up its ARM coverage by adding ARM64EC architecture with ARM64 parity. Support for hybrid ARM64X modules requires experimental LLVM toolchain and handling C++ exceptions and runtime type information, RTTI. Scaling in Vulkan. Wine 10.0 introduces more accurate high DPI support, and non-DPI aware windows are now scaled automatically. Users wishing to override that support, be it per app or globally, can use newly added compatibility flags in the relevant prefixes. Elsewhere, the X11 backend supports Vulkan child window rendering for apps. This change brings parity with OpenGL, which has supported 3D rendering in child window and early builds. The Vulkan driver is bumped to 1.4.303 and now supports Vulkan Video Extension. Desktop changes. Wine 10.0 features an improved Wayland driver with OpenGL support, proper positioning of pop-up windows, and auto repeat key support. With the experience deemed decent, Wine 10.0 enables its Wayland driver by default, though X11 driver is used if available. There's also an experimental mode setting emulation mechanism available, which devs say can force display mode changes to be fully emulated instead of actually changing the display settings. Sticking with displays, Wine 10.0 offers a new desktop control panel applet. This is used to inspect or modify display configuration, change virtual desktop resolution, or control the above-mentioned emulated display settings. Want to disable system tray icons and or shell launchers on desktop? Set no tray items display equals 1 and or no desktop equals 1. Values in the following key: HKLM / software / Microsoft / Windows / current version / policies / explorer. Input-wise, Wine 10.0 supports touchscreens in the X11 backend. Basic multi-touch support expands to VORC keyboard layout support and adds a new joystick control panel applet to make toggling some advanced settings easier. A Bluetooth driver has also been implemented, albeit in formative state with only basic functionality. Other changes. GL Renderer now requires GLSL 1.2. Shader Stencil export implemented for GL and Vulkan renderers. Alternative GLSL shader backend using VKD3D TAC shader. FFmpeg TAC based backend alternative to GStreamer, opt-in, experimental. Media Foundation multimedia pipelines more accurately implemented. Direct Music supports loading MIDI files. Unicode 16.0.0. Command prompt tool input parser rewritten. File comparison tools, and then more and more tools. The release document covers the above changes plus many more. Go get drunk on the details. You can download Wine 10.0 source code and build it from hand. But why crush grapes when you can just buy it ready bottled? The official Wine website has details on official binary packages for various Linux distributions. Wine maintains its own Ubuntu repo for Ubuntu 20.04 LTS and later, so it is relatively easy to install the latest Wine release on Ubuntu. New stable builds lag the announcement by a week or two. Give devs time to package it. I can't remember the last time I needed to use Wine. I am not a developer or gamer. This is him, not me. But I nonetheless appreciate the effort that goes into the software so that it is here, ready if I ever have need. Whether you're an infrequent user or sup on its goodness daily, I'm sure you'll join me in raising a glass to the dedicated devs behind the Wine project on a rich, full-bodied Wine 10.0 stable release.
So you guys use it?
Oh, well, I use
No.
Proton. I don't use Wine directly.
It's gotten really good over the years, I have to admit. I mean, in most cases, it's just the experience, like Audacity, for example, just runs a Windows version of
Oh no, we're not
Audacity.
going into Audacity now.
Well, it's the one example that I've got recently where I wanted to see just how much, without having to build up Windows VM and all that.
Oh, I figured you were going to reach for that. I run Arch line.
It may or
You're
may
an
not have been
Archie?
on Arch. But no, it's over the years. I mean, it was hit and miss in the early days because it's been around forever. And it was good for the few things that ran really well on it. But now it's almost, unless it needs like really complicated things, I mean, there's a lot of software obviously that won't run on it, but we don't have that expectation. But for the stuff that does run, it runs really well. You cannot tell because it adds all the necessary desktop files to your menus and all that, and you can have your Windows only software running as if it was native. And now that it works, in the beginning, Wine is not an emulator, is what the recursive acronym stands for, and that was the truth in the beginning. But now that ARM is a thing, and by extension RISC-V and whatnot, there is some emulation going on there. But
So for me, I've always found Wine to be really good,
yeah.
but I've never really needed to use it because most of the software that I use,
Except on your Steam Deck.
yeah, except on my Steam Deck, I was going to say apart from gaming, of all the other software that I use, I just use Linux versions of it. So, for example, I know friends of mine who run Microsoft Office using Wine on their Linux boxes, and it's kind of like I just use LibreOffice instead. Do you know what I mean? And so I've not needed to use it. As I said,
That's a
apart from gaming.
luxury.
Yeah.
That's definitely a luxury though, because I think when I think of Wine, like I think back to the days where you had to use Outlook or Windows, Microsoft Office, or
Right.
some piece of proprietary software that if you were lucky would get like a bronze. So it was tough for them for a long time to. It's always a moving target, and it was just difficult to get those, especially very complicated ones, to run well. But yeah, I haven't used it recently enough to even really know, because everything's just sort of web based now.
Yeah, well, for a long time there, I
Yeah,
mean,
that's the other thing,
LibreOffice
isn't it?
was great, but everybody else was still using the Microsoft format, and LibreOffice didn't translate into the Microsoft format very well. Now,
Yeah.
it would do it, it would just mess everything up entirely. So it was easier to run Microsoft Office in Wine. And then also, like when I was looking for a note-taking application that was comparable to OneNote, because OneNote's awesome, it was easier to run that in Wine way back when, before they came out with 360, so that you could access everything from a web page or a web app.
Yeah, that's what I was going to
So,
say, because things like Outlook, as an example, I mean, I've got that, as a progressive web app, So, and maybe I need to look into this a bit more.
you really don't. You don't need to look into Wine more anymore. It works just fine as Proton. Well, let's move on. Legit.
Okay then, so GTK's X11 backend now deprecated and planned for removal in GTK 5. So this is from Fronix. GTK developers have been holding another Hackfest this week for the annual FOSDEM Developer Conference happening this weekend in Brussels. GTK developers are working towards the GTK 4.18 stable release and continuing to think more about GTK 5. Seems like just yesterday we had GTK 4. Okay, bloody hell. In a blog post today on the GTK project blog, they noted as part of their spring cleaning, they've removed their old OpenGL renderer, given the successes of the newer renders. GTK developers have also made the move to deprecate their X11 and HTML5 Broadway backends, Broadway was a nifty backend for outputting to modern HTML5 for GTK apps within web browsers, but ultimately not much use. GTK developers previously talked about deprecating their X11 support in favor of Wayland, and that has now taken place. GTK 4.17.4 was released today, and it goes ahead with X11 and Broadway backend deprecation. Meanwhile, new to GTK 4.17.4 is an Android backend. GTK apps can now work natively on Android smartphones, but for the meantime, this is being considered experimental. Ooh, interesting. GTK 4.17.4 also adds support for rotated videos with GTK Video, fixes many bugs and other enhancements. GTK developers are planning on removing the now deprecated X11 and Broadway backends for the GTK 5 toolkit release. On the GTK blog, they also outline other spring cleaning like dropping support for prior to Windows 10 and macOS 10.15, plus other development work with their sites on the GTK 5 toolkit. Yeah, it feels like it was just yesterday we had GTK 4, now we're getting on to 5. Dominic.
Well, GTK is known for moving fast.
Yeah.
Pause for comedic break. Right on. So we have a real-time update on the Facebook thing, thanks to Londoner and his hard work for the show. Thank you, Londoner. We have an article that he linked to in our news section from Tom's Hardware entitled Facebook Admits that the Linux topic crackdown was in error and has been fixed. Discussions of Linux are allowed on our services, insists the social media giant. This isn't long. Facebook's heavy-handed censorship of Linux groups and topics was in error, the social media juggernaut has admitted, responding to reports earlier this week sparked by the curious censorship of the eminently wholesome DistroWatch. Facebook contacted PC Mag to say that it had made a mistake and the underlying issue had been rectified. And I quote, "This enforcement was an error and has since been addressed. Discussions of Linux are allowed on our services," said a Meta rep to PC Mag. That is the full extent of the statement reproduced by the source. Still, it helps us to dismiss various conspiracy theories about the Silicon Valley establishment feeling threatened by the open source movement. Like most big companies, Meta seems slow to respond and react to gaffes that adversely affect users. Copenhagen-hosted DistroWatch says it has appealed against the community standards triggered ban shortly after it noticed it was in effect January 19th. PC Mag received the Facebook admission of error on January 28th. The latest statement from DistroWatch, which now prefers posting on Mastodon, indicates that Facebook has lifted the DistroWatch links ban. In the above post, which it's actually speaking, I'll link to this article. It's in the news section on our Discord. In the post, DistroWatch notes that it is aware of the supposed lifting of its ban, but that the account still seems to be locked. We just checked DistroWatch's Facebook page, so you don't have to. A post yesterday was 403 forbidden by Facebook, but now has a new BSD release published earlier today. Seems successful.
Okay, quick correction. It was not Londoner that posted that. It was Paul.
Oh?
AKA No More.
Okay. Well, Londoner is who turned me on to it. So I'll give both men the credit. Okay, reading on. So it looks like we have a satisfactory outcome from the situation, though it wouldn't have hurt Facebook to apologize to DistroWatch, among others, publicly. Meanwhile, the reason for the Facebook Linux ban remains a mystery. If we had to put forward a theory behind the ban, it would probably highlight how Facebook is transitioning its fact-checking to an X-like community notes model. Transitions have made teething problems, and Facebook posts a lot of data to its platforms every minute of the day. It is ironic, however, that shifting away from professional fact-checker-driven censorship should result in innocuous decisions of open source operating systems being so strictly censored on this social media platform. This was an AI error. This was some AI bollocks nonsense. You got to know.
Yeah,
you got to know.
You better believe it. Yep.
Yeah.
You know it. Yep.
So yeah.
That's just brilliant. Oh God, it's so sweet, isn't it?
I mean, nobody's come out and said that, but you got to know that is what they replaced their fact checking with. You know, all that talk about being community driven is nonsense. They've got AI in place, and once again, AI proves to be exactly what it really is.
Can you imagine the volume of requests they get, though, in a day's time? I mean, I get why they can't employ a large enough workforce to really deal with it.
Yeah.
Billions of users posting. I mean, how many posts a day is on that platform?
It's got to be
so
enormous.
It is a shame that it takes them a while to get through that. But I mean, it's nice to know that things do bubble up. You know, that, it wasn't as big of a conspiracy theory as people might have thought, but there was a problem, and, you know, it was addressed. It took a little while, but, you know, they did fix it. So
cool.
Not completely dismissed like I was thinking earlier, but it's a more logical answer. So.
Well, it was somewhat anticlimactic, but fun nonetheless. Moving on, however, Linux 6.14 RISC-V kernel adds support for T-head vector extensions. And this is from Ghostwrite. Okay. I'm not sure what I'm looking at here. Ghostwrite from Phoronix. The RISC-V GPU or CPU architecture feature updates have been submitted and merged for the nearly over Linux 6.14 merge window. Most notable this cycle on the RISC-V architecture side is adding support for the T-head vector extensions. The Linux kernel now supports exposing these T-head vector extensions to user space on systems implementing them, support for them. The Zwan-T X-thread vector extension is a non-standard, non-conforming extension for adding 32 vector registers and 6 unprivileged CSRs. XT header vector is derived from the RISC-V vector 0.7.1 extension. The patch working out of this T-head vector extension support has been in the works the past number of months, but now mainlined. Linux 6.14 also adds mitigations for Ghostwrite vulnerability. Okay. The vulnerability affects the XT head vector instruction set. The mitigation is disabling this newly added support. Ghostwrite was announced back in August as one of the first notable RISC-V CPU vulnerabilities. Okay, so I didn't know what I was reading in the title there. So Ghostwrite is in fact a vulnerability specific to RISC-V, and that's interesting. I've got this strange interest in RISC-V. I don't own a single piece of hardware with it.
I know. I find it very, very strange.
It's not like there's a plethora of RISC-V hardware to begin with, so
I mean, there's one or two things you can get your hands on, and they're not very interesting. Well, they're not very powerful.
Right.
They would mostly just be toys.
They're reference board. It's kind of like reference, builds of stuff. So it's if you're programming, if you're trying to develop software, kind of like the Pine stuff. You know what I mean? So, except that it's, from what I've heard, and maybe I'm misremembering this, I think some of them are pretty pricey.
Yeah, they are. Well, you can get a laptop right now that's got a kind of a, I don't know, mid-range power-wise RISC-V SoC in it. And yeah, I mean, it's priced up there around what you would expect to pay for a mid-range laptop with a x86 processor in it, which is quite a bit for what it actually is capable of doing. But I mean, the kind of people that are going to pay for that are the ones that are really interested in being a part of the RISC-V thing. I don't have that kind of disposable income sitting around. I wish I did. It would be interesting. I mean, I will continue to follow this stuff, and I will continue to make irresponsible, ridiculous predictions every year about advancements in that instruction set. And one of these days,
it's going to be next year is the year of RISC-V.
One of these days, brother, it's coming. I can feel it.
And it's going to happen just after the year of the Linux desktop, isn't it?
Yeah, that. Oh, but there you go.
Okay, so just give me the effing links. Cursing, it seems, disables Google's AI overviews. So I put this in from Ars Technica because I thought it was hilarious. The latest trick to stop those annoying AI answers is also the most cathartic. If you search Google for a way to turn off the company's AI-powered search results, you may well get an AI overview telling you that AI overviews can't be directly disabled in Google search. Talk about your non-recursive thing. But if you instead ask Google how to turn off the effing, and I'm sure you know what I mean, Google AI results, you get a standard set of useful web suggestions without any AI overview at the top. The existence of this curse to disable Google AI trick has been making the round on social media in recent days, and it holds up with Ars's own testing. For instance, when searching for how do you turn off adjective Google AI results, a variety of curse word adjectives reliably disabled the AI overviews, while adjectives like dumb or lousy did not. Inserting curse words randomly at any point in the search query seems to have had a similar effect. A nice polite query that results in a nice polite you can't from AI overviews, Google says that from Ars Technica. A cathartic curse eliminates the AI overview in the results. There's long been evidence that Google's Gemini AI system tries to avoid swearing if at all possible, which might explain why AI overviews balk at the queries that contain curses. Users should also keep in mind, though, that the actual web link results in a query can change significantly when curse words are inserted, especially if safe search is turned off. For those who want to get rid of AI overviews without a curse-filled Google search history, because that'll be interesting, users have discovered plenty of other methods for disabling the intrusive recommendations. Just after Google launched the AI Overviews feature, savvy searchers noted that adding @UDM equals 14 to the search URL will get rid of both AI overviews and web snippets. A little fiddling with browser settings or plugins can even get this URL parameter inserted automatically into every search. Okay, what does that parameter mean? Does anybody know? I don't know. Okay, anyway. More recently, some Google users have noticed that appending the string AI to a search without quotes seems also to turn off AI overviews in the results. And this method also worked in Ars's testing and has appending practically any other text string after the minus sign at the end of a search for some reason. The bit about using glue on pizza can be traced back to an 11-year-old troll post on Reddit. So while cursing at your Google search box to get rid of intrusive AI might not be strictly necessary, it can serve as a cathartic way to eliminate a feature that seems to be flawed by design and serves a fundamental misunderstanding of why people use Google in the first place. More than that, the social spread of the new curse the AI method shows how many Google users are still annoyed or angered by a feature that often gives misleading, dangerous, or outright incorrect results. So now I will be swearing copiously at my computer.
Well, it looks like UDM
even more than
equals,
normal.
UDM equals 14 is just a switch to turn off AI. Is all it does. So
Don't pretend like you don't yell at that thing daily.
Well, yeah, I do anyway, but now I feel good about it.
So, Majid, to answer your question, the ampersand and then anything after it is basically a parameter. So you're sending the URL to the web server, and then you pass it a parameter, and depending on what programming language you're using, like PHP or whatever, it can take that and then it just knows to do something different. Like it's just like you'd pass a variable at a command line terminal or a terminal in Linux. I mean, it's the same basic principle where you're just adding additional. So something about that UDM meant don't return.
It's just a
AI.
switch to turn off AI.
Yeah. And I'm sure that's this game. I love these games. These always are so delicious to me to see, like, the company thinks they've outsmarted people, and then people come up with some hilarious way to get around it. And this is probably one of the funniest I've ever seen, frankly. Back to our AI overlords, right?
Yeah, brilliant. All you have to do is swear at them.
Yeah, you can't swear at them. Is there a more American thing than that? Like, we have to no curse words now.
Actually, I thought it was very British, actually. Because we don't do cursing here in the UK.
Yes,
you don't?
Terrible.
Oh, no, we do.
I'm going to let you.
You're
do a lot.
awful.
In
every
polite
time I
conversation.
Watch a Netflix show, every time I watch a British Netflix show that's like not filtered, that just like a Ricky Gervais show or something, it's like the language he uses is shocking sometimes. It's just like, wow, I cannot believe
We're getting there, though.
Yeah. I must say, actually, it's just on a side note, the F word, I have a feeling is just turning into a normal word now.
Yeah,
because
that's true.
Because
As it should.
I found myself on a discussing some patients once on an ICU. This is some years ago, and the diagnosis given to me by the handing over doctor was, this chap is effed. That was it. That was his diagnosis.
Wow.
I just kind of went, do you want to?
That's
awesome. Do you want
awesome.
to explain a little bit more? And then he
So
explained.
should we
a bit
take
more.
this one to the family? And this is okay. So.
Well, he explained it a little bit more, and then I went, actually, that is probably the best way to do. Yeah, this guy's a goner. This guy's a goner.
I'm
Definitely.
sure I read somewhere they did some kind of weird study back in the 30s, and I gotta find this because they did, and it's probably mostly anecdotal, but they decided that people that used a lot of colorful metaphors, adjectives, and adverbs were, on average, more reliable, trustworthy people. And I'm here for it. 100%.
God, I wish my dad was
Soldiers
alive
must
to hear
be
that.
really
Man.
trustworthy then.
I'm because it matters. I throw a lot of bad language out there when I'm not
actually,
filtered.
did anybody else not catch how Bill used a British swear word earlier when he said, "This is just bollocks"?
Oh, you know how often I hear that
That
word?
was me.
Yeah, I did too.
That was a little while ago.
Yeah.
That's okay. I thought about giving the explanation of changing the U to an E, so you could tell somebody to go feck themselves.
No, we have to take a
That's
stand,
Irish,
Joe.
actually, but yeah.
It is, but it still plays a lot on the Irish play a lot on British television, so.
Yeah,
I like the Good Places take on swearing, where it's like fork and shirt, and that's always fun.
melon farmer.
Yeah, it's just you're using
Paul
standard words.
Bunt says in the comments, all this planet needs is a priest and a coroner.
Patient. All this patient needs. is
All
a
this
priest
patient
and a
needs.
coroner.
Oh, okay. Well, maybe I need new glasses.
Well, he didn't spell it right.
Patent. All this patent needs is a priest and a coroner. Yeah. Still funny. Funny the way I said it, too.
Yeah, actually, it was funnier the way you said it. Actually, to be fair.
Oh, if nothing else, that's it for the news. Moving on to security and privacy. Joe?
Judge says controversial FBI searches require a warrant. This is
Can I
from
just
Wired.
can I just butt in just for a second? Do you guys don't have warrants or something in America that this is
We
a
have
news
different
story?
levels
No,
of
this is-
warrants, and we have ways.
They
the
try to
cops
trick
have
you
ways
into getting
around
yourself in
warrants.
trouble.
Yeah.
It's,
Or they say that there's probable cause or
yeah.
something stupid
This-
like that.
this is one of those glaring ones that, like after 9/11, you know, in the Department of Homeland Security, like they really took some liberties, like with what they could do in terms of surveillance. You know, they were never allowed to surveil American citizens.
And giving people complimentary orange jumpsuits as well.
Well, it was always this like, well, we're going to do this for a short amount of time because we need to protect ourselves, and then we're going to stop doing it. And the reality is, this is one of those things that feels like they've been doing for the past 25 years and shouldn't have been doing, you know, and it's like, yes, of course you're not supposed to do this.
Don't worry. I'm sure next month we won't have warrants anymore.
Would somebody please think of the children?
Will somebody please think of the refreshments?
Yes.
Sorry, that's a Simpsons joke.
Oh, okay. Well, so we've digressed.
I'm only here for the snacks.
That's why none of my mats in front of my door say welcome. I don't want anybody to make the assumption.
Yeah, that is a poor assumption to make when you haven't even come in the building yet.
Yeah.
Especially in Texas.
Yeah.
Judge says controversial FBI searches require a warrant. From Wired Magazine via Londoner. A U.S. judge in New York this week found that the FBI's practice of searching data on U.S. persons under Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act without obtaining a warrant is unconstitutional. FISA gives the U.S. government the authority to collect the communications of foreign entities through internet providers and companies like Apple and Google. Once the data was collected, the FBI could perform backdoor searches for information on U.S. citizens or residents who communicated with foreigners, and it did so without first obtaining a warrant. Judge D.R.C. Hall found that these searches do require a warrant. To hold otherwise would effectively allow law enforcement to amass a repository of communications under Section 702, including those of U.S. persons, that can later be searched on demand without limitation, the judge wrote. More details at gizmodo.com. This reminds me of something that was going on like 10, 15 years ago, where a bunch of Google servers were in foreign countries, probably, I think it was like Ireland or the EU or something. And this allowed the US government full access to be able to search anything they wanted. So even if you kept all of your business in the US, because it was stored on a server outside of the country, that gave them access without a warrant. And there was a big to do about that back then. So same crap, different day. I don't know. Do you guys have any thoughts on this one?
It's just like I said in the comments, it's just best to keep your mouth shut.
Well, listen, this is
that's obviously something you do quite often, Bill.
Now, I mean, I try to
do as I say, not as I do.
Right.
You know, I think right now, like, I'm having a whole issue with the balance of powers in this country, and so it's nice to see that the judicial system can still
for now
do something. Well, listen,
is there something interesting happening in your country? I never
We're not going there. We're not
doing it. Don't fall for it.
Is an
don't fall for it, Joe.
Word.
Don't fall for it, Joe.
Don't do it.
I will go down the rabbit hole.
Yeah, we got to put a net over that rabbit hole right now.
Pull my string.
Oh, if nothing else, that concludes security and privacy. Moving on to the bi-weekly wanderings, and I suppose I'll start us off. It's been a while since I guess I missed one episode. About the only thing I've done tech-wise is did a fresh install, not on this machine, on another one, because I wanted to experiment with something first. I did a fresh install of 22.1 Mint, and the one thing I was interested in doing was seeing how well it would behave with a completely ButterFS installation. And I was actually really impressed because my experience in the past with distributions that don't officially support ButterFS is that they don't, I mean, it works, but it doesn't create any subvolumes, and it's just a bit lacking. But in this case, it actually worked out, though there's a couple of things that I noticed along the way. If you just create the EFI system partition, and then the root, the ButterFS root, and then allow it to do its own thing with the swap file, which is what it would normally do with a completely automated partition scheme, then it will create the ButterFS subvolumes for the root and then another one for the home, but then it mounts the subvolume for home to the swap file, which I thought was strange. I don't know if that was a bug or something that just was half-baked or what. Now, if you go through and do the manual partitioning, which you have to do anyway to do any of this, and you create, which is what I normally do anyway, I create an actual swap partition that matches the physical RAM in whatever machine I'm installing it on. Then it doesn't do that. It creates the subvolume for the root and then a subvolume for your home directory, and then it mounts both of those accordingly. It mounts the subvolume for root to the root directory and then the subvolume for home to your home directory. Why is that important? Because when you're doing snapshots, for example, you will do snapshots on the subvolume level. That way, you're only snapshotting the subvolumes that you want to keep track of. So when you're using, like in Mint's case, Mint has this tool, really great tool called Time Shift that actually offers two methods, an rsync method and a ButterFS method. And the thing I thought was interesting was with the ButterFS method, the process of creating the snapshots automatically is instantaneous, because there's a huge difference between an rsync backup where you're creating basically hard links to files on the file system, rather than a ButterFS snapshot where you're just creating a moment in time. So nothing will change, nothing will be added to the file system until something is deleted from the file system that the snapshot is based on. These things are difficult to explain in regular English, but the point is when you have snapshots or you have subvolumes separated out to where you've got this stuff siloed off over here, then you can make snapshots of your root file system without creating these huge snapshots. Because if you've snapshotted your home directory and you had a lot of big files going in and out of your home directory, they will stay in that snapshot until that snapshot is deleted, when, depending on when that snapshot was taken. So I was really kind of impressed with that, because the problem that I've been dealing with, well, twofold really, with my main machine right here, is that it's installed on the regular extended 4 partition, but then my big data drive where I've got all of the files that happen whenever we're making these shows and whatnot, and that's a considerable amount of data. Well, that's on a ButterFS file system. Mounting a ButterFS file system inside of an extended 4 root means, for some reason that's beyond my understanding, that you have no trash can functionality whatsoever inside of the ButterFS file system. So having a ButterFS root that you can install other ButterFS file systems on, in theory, negates that problem. So that was the reason why I went down this rabbit hole. So that's all kind of impressed me, because it just really seems to work well, and it seems to work well enough to where somebody over at Mint is actually thinking about this and using it and working on it. So that was interesting. Okay, so I missed the last episode, and I felt kind of bad about that, because Docker is kind of one of those things that I use a lot. Now, admittedly, I set a lot of this infrastructure up a couple of years ago, more than a couple of years ago now, I guess. And there's a lot of things that I might have to learn over again if I ever had to rebuild it. But I wanted to take a little bit of opportunity in my wanderings to talk about Docker a little bit, because I didn't get an opportunity in the last episode, because I wanted to address a couple of things that I've heard people complain about, and I invite the other hosts to kind of jump in when it's appropriate. One common complaint that I've heard about dealing with Docker containers is updating the containers. The process of updating containers and updating the images that are used seems to be it seems to be arcane. It seems to be a little bit opaque to people, and a lot of that is because when you're using Docker Compose, for example, it's not made really, really clear the fact that when you use Docker Compose and then you use the Docker Compose command to shut down the container, that container is ephemeral at that point. It goes away completely. It's deleted when you're using Docker Compose. So when you go and pull the image again, so if you shut down a container, you pull the image with the Docker pull command, you get an updated image, and then restart that container with the Docker Compose, and then you get an updated container with that command. There's no need to delete the container, because when you're using, as I said, when you're using Docker Compose, the container itself is completely ephemeral. And I see the look on Majid's face.
Yeah, I mean, that is something I need to get my head around, which is why I haven't been able to get Docker working on my NAS, because I need to kind of conceptually understand that.
And it kind of, in my case, or at least my understanding is that it kind of, for it to be that simple, you really need to use the Docker Compose, which really it's the best way to manage your containers anyway, because you've got a YAML file there that's basically you're declaring everything about that container, and these containers are complicated enough because you need to specify port numbers, you need to map port numbers to other port numbers, because oftentimes, for example, when you're running websites, for example, and you've got traffic coming into your house, only one machine at a time has access to any port going out on your router. And in the case of websites, you need ports 80 and 443. Now, in order to get around that problem, in order to have several websites, you need the reverse proxy. So you have 443 and 80 going to the reverse proxy, and then the reverse proxy will send the traffic to other ports that each one of these Docker containers is listening to. And those ports are mapped to 443 and 80 by the Docker Compose command, or the Docker Compose, the YAML file. So the container thinks it's listening. The software within the container thinks it's listening to 443, when actually Docker Compose is mapping the 443 traffic to whatever port you specify yourself, and then that traffic is going between the container and the reverse proxy. Okay, is any of this making sense? Is this tracking it all? Because it's, like I said, you can only have one. You can only send traffic from the router to one device, or one thing at a time can listen to 443, but it can be remapped by a reverse proxy to another port. The software is only set up to listen to 80 and 443, but Docker Compose knows how to remap those port numbers to other port numbers. So you got all these layers of abstraction in order to provide a method of having several websites, or in our case, it's several websites and cloud services, which all need access to ports 80 and 443 for HTML and SSL. They're all able to do that because the whole mechanism behind Docker and the reverse proxy is sussing out where all this traffic is going by mapping 80 and 443 to other port numbers. Okay, so example, traffic comes in, somebody wants mintCast.org. Traffic comes in on 80 and 443 into my house, and my modem sends that traffic to the router, and the router sees, okay, I'm supposed to send 80 and 443 mintcast.org to this machine, which it has no idea beyond that what the machine on the other end is doing with that traffic. This machine sees then that this is the one that's running the reverse proxy. It sees that, okay, this is for mintcast.org. Mintcast.org is actually mapped through the reverse proxy to a Docker container on this machine, which is actually listening to ports 4443 or something like that, and sends it to that machine, and then that machine sends it to the Docker container. The Docker container remaps that traffic back to port 443, which is what's needed for WordPress to think that it has SSL running. Did I do a good job on that? Because it's a lot of layers of complexity.
No, you did, but people might not understand the most important part of that is because explaining it the one time just makes it sound overly complicated to end up back at port 80 and 443. But if you're running 3 or 4 Docker containers on the same system, then they would all have the same IP address, and that's why that port forwarding that is somewhat complicated, that breaks back down to 8443 per Docker container is needed. So that way you can get to each one of those individually.
So the reverse proxy is what's very important here, because everything is coming in 443 and 80 to that reverse proxy. And then it's a reverse proxy that sees, okay, because everything is coming in. If you look at our DNS list, everything is mapped to the exact same IP address. And when it comes in, it's all mapped to whatever our external IP address is. It's the reverse proxy that sees, okay, the headers on this request are for mintcast.org, and that is actually mapped to this port number. Over and each one of these Docker containers has its own port number, and then the Docker container says, okay, this traffic needs to be remapped to 443 because you can't. You can run stuff like WordPress on other ports, but it doesn't behave. And the SSL stuff, if you got other stuff needing SSL, it won't work right. So you just have to have a solution that maps everything out of 80 and 443 and then back to 80 and 443. And for the most part, it seems to work really, really well, and it's all automated to the point. And that's another thing, the updating process in my case, because I needed a mechanism that would work without me being here to do it throughout the week. So I use a tool called Watchtower, which itself is a Docker container. And what Watchtower will do is periodically check to see if there is newer versions of the image for all of the containers, and then it will download that image, shut down the container, and then rebuild the container based on the new image. And so then you're always up to date. Now I know a lot of devs and a lot of people, a lot of Docker people will condemn me for doing that, because it's basically just you're really riding the lightning with that. my answer to that is yeah, I understand, but it seems to work 99% of the time, enough to where the level of success I've had with it way outweighs the problems that may happen along the way. So it is a good way to have something running. Now, what will happen though? What will happen is you will have, it does not automatically delete the old images. And these images are several gigabytes in size sometimes. So in my case, I have a cron job running once a week that just executes a simple Docker system prune tac A, tac F, which that command will erase every container, which isn't needed, but it does it anyway. It erases every container that's not connected, that's not running, and every image that is not connected to a running container, and every volume, because you got this concept of volumes on Docker as well, where you've got, whenever you create storage that is specifically attached to or associated with the containers, that it's called a volume. And there's a couple of ways of handling volumes. Volumes can be mapped from inside the container out to storage that is outside the container, all within the Docker Compose. Now, there's ways of doing this with a Docker command too, but when you do it that way, it gets a little unwieldy, in my opinion. You can map storage that way. That way, it's persistent, or you can specify volumes within the container that are just part of the Docker system and don't go outside of it whatsoever. Either way, the system prune command will delete any volumes. This is why you kind of have to be careful with this command, because if you've got, for example, if you've got a container with some volumes, and for some reason the container, after a restart or after an update, the container failed to restart, and you run a system prune command, you run the risk of deleting the volume associated with that container, and that can delete all the data that container has been accumulating. So you do have to be careful. It's almost probably best to do a different command at first, which is Docker image prune tac A, and what that'll just do is delete the images that will pile up, because it can get to be, I think if you're running, in my case, I'm running about 12 different containers or 12 different images. If I let that go and I didn't prune those images, it could get to be up over 12 gigabytes in just a month or less. So it's good to keep up with that. So updating is kind of a process of either shutting down the container and then re-pulling the image, or you can use something like Watchtower. Watchtower is just, it's one of those things that's been really, I don't know that I would be able to do it all that well without Watchtower, to be honest with you, because it's been the tool that I've relied on for some time.
Do you use Portainer?
I do not. Everything I've got is just pure Docker and Docker Compose, and it's ran well enough. Like I said, it runs so well that I've kind of lost my knowledge of how it was all set up to some degree. Not completely, but to its credit.
Definitely migrate it all to Portainer. Actually, you don't even need to migrate it. All you need to do is install Portainer, and it will find them all and manage them.
Yeah, I thought about trying that. I want to try it on a smaller scale though because there's
putting it into production.
Yeah, because there's quite a few websites I'm running off of these two machines behind me, and it just works.
Okay.
The thing with Portainer is I've heard all these great things, but it just the whole Docker Compose and the system I've had of keeping that all up is worked so well that I just haven't.
Portainer uses Docker Compose.
Yeah, I know. I just wanted to. I was just, I don't know. Haven't had a lot of reason to look into it. I have been curious though, because I've heard a lot of great things about it. And then when you started talking about it,
Because I'm gonna nag you until you do it. That sounds like a good reason.
yeah, and then, I mean we'll have to get back into the container thing too once I do,
Well,
because
when we do the Proxmox episode,
yeah, that'll be good. So I mean, what else? What other pitfalls do people have with Docker, or do people even know how to describe what it is they're concerned about?
I think a lot of this comes down to, I mean, you described Docker Compose, which, regardless of the details, the specifics of the images and what's required, whether there has to be a database,
Yeah.
and you think of it almost like in terms of a computer. I do in my mind, like the components of a computer, there has to be some kind of storage. There's the software itself that's running, and each individual application then can be, I mean, you can run them as one monolithic container. That's not normally how people do it, but that modularity is what makes it special and makes it easy to sort of scale. If you need to, you can scale horizontally and vertically pretty easily with something like this. So that's what's so appealing about it. And the compose file is really just saying, here's how that happens. Here's all the pieces that are needed. And then the incidentals, like which address, which port, that kind of stuff.
with Docker, I'd say you really shouldn't put multiple things into each, dock. You should have it separated. You can have them interacting with each other. Like, what I used to do was have one that was running a VPN and then another one that would attach to it that would then use that as a network. But the other one would be running whatever it was running, whether that was Chrome or Qubit Torrent or something like that.
You want to be able to identify when things go wrong. You want to be able to see that it's this container that's got the problem, or that container. And you'll have situations where, like the WordPress containers, they all need. They call for MySQL, but I use MariaDB. One image is pulled, and then I'm running about 6 different websites here, 7, and there's 7 database containers that are built from that one image, but I'm able to see, because they're separate containers, I'm able to see if there's a problem with each one of them. That's why the monolithic thing just probably wouldn't work in my case. Not a good idea, I don't think, when you've got a lot of stuff going on, because you want to be able to identify when you have a problem and then go fix that one thing rather than trying to track it down, because it's all...
Yeah, I mean, things are meant to be siloed. Otherwise, just run a VM.
Yeah. But anyway, that's my wanderings. I got a little bit long-winded, I know. I'm sorry.
It's so short in the notes.
It is. Time is of the essence. Anyway, Joe, what do you got?
Okay, the saga of the server rack continues, although I think it's mostly done now. One more episode, hopefully, maybe, and then maybe more after. But last time I was talking about a hard drive tray that I had 3D printed, a 3U 10-inch hard drive tray that holds 6 hard drives. Well, it's made to hold 6 drives. But I was doing some more 3D printing for that. The main portion of it, it's a 48-hour print, but it came along pretty easy after I made the modification. The side mounts that I had designed, and the back plate and the slot holders that the HDD goes into, all printed, all put together. I think I have the back plate on upside down, which did cause me some issues, but not a big deal. I have printed the rails for the HDDs. I also printed the adapters to 2.5-inch drives, and you put those together and they're working well. There are so many different configurations that I could set up for this, so that I can mount anywhere from 6 to 12 drives into the rack. And I have a cable that I can use to hook up only 4 drives to my large PC, with the possibility of getting another cable for a total of 8 drives onto that. I don't think I need to worry about getting 8 full drives at this point, so I'll stick to the first cable, and I'm looking at ways to hook up the rest of the drives to the main PC, that I'm going to that I have put into the rack at this point. But we'll come back to that. I actually did test out an AE um, M.2 connector, which normally holds, it's a slot for Wi-Fi. They make cards with 2 SATA ports. I was able to find one at a really low cost. I hooked it up. It did not work. It's supposed to give me 2 SATA drives. My computer would not boot while it was hooked up. And that's the HP ProLiant 600 G3, or no, ProDesk, HP ProDesk 600 G3 Mini that I put Proxmox on. That was an ordeal in itself. I've actually done a lot with that so far, but I think I'm going to save that for another show. But in short, I will say that I set up Portainer again, and Pi-hole is now running for, along with some other interesting things that I've been testing out. I do have a plethora of lower storage, like 2.5-inch drives, ranging from 250 gig to 1 terabyte. Thank you, Bill. I can put a lot of them in the rack, power them all with the power supply that I did pull from the DAS, or I can get the SATA to USB adapters, which, while slower, are simpler and easier. I've seen some interesting, like I said, the M.2 key adapters to SATA. There's also an NGFF one that I'm going to try next that hooks up over USB-C, which the ProDesk does have. See what the speeds are like on that, and just use the power supply that I have there. And I do have very long SATA cables that should work just fine that came out of the DVD replicator that I got the power supply from. Then I can swap out the drives as needed in the future. I can put the drives for the main PC in the same rack as the ones from the mini PC and still only have one cable ran to the main PC. Now, besides the power supply from the DAS and the drives, I'll pull a power switch. And actually, this is incorrect. I was able to pull the power switch off of the case from the DAS. And it's just a square little switch. It's not a momentary. It's push it in, it stays pushed in. And I was able to mount that to the rack, and it works superb. I did have to resolder the connections on it because I guess I was a little violent in the removal process, or they weren't soldered very well. But it's all working now, and I love it. Now, I will say that I previously thought that it was the 80 millimeter fans in the back of that DAS that were causing all the noise. I found out it's actually the fan inside the power supply that is just a little loud and obnoxious. And I don't know if I want to take that power supply apart to replace that fan. That sounds a little shocking. But I could switch it out to a full-size ATX power supply, or I think I have a half-size ATX power supply. But that does mean buying a board adapter for the 24-pin connector so that I can add a switch to turn it on and off. I could also go with the low-cost 1U ITX power supplies, but then I'd still need to get that adapter, and it'd probably fit in there a little bit better. But I think the one from the DAS fits in really well at this point. It's 2U. It slides between the.
Need one of these?
Does that have the button on it?
No, it just goes from
Okay.
the 20 pin to a 16 pin, or
No, I'm talking about a board that you plug the 24 pin into, and it just has a button on it. There's
Oh.
actually 2 types. You can get one that you can connect to your other power supply, the one in your main PC. And whenever you turn on your main PC, it will turn on the other power supply because it get power over
Oh, I see what you're saying.
like the
Yeah.
SATA connection. But I want the one that just has a push button so I can turn it on and off.
Right.
So, and they do make that adapter as well. But it might be something to look for in the future. And I do have the rack arranged into its proper configuration. I've posted a picture on Telegram and Discord if you want to see it. I think it looks awesome. I have the Pro Desk on there. I have my little travel Wi-Fi router on the top. I have my GS108, my 8-port network switch on there. I have 2, 4, 6. I have 7 hard drives currently. 6 of them are 2.5 inch, and one full size that needs replaced. But it's there for now. As long as I don't do much to it, it seems to work fine. It is currently storing one of the Nextcloud backups, so hopefully I'm able to replace that in a few months. I also designed some side panels that I still need to print and attach. It should provide a bit more stability and uniformity, and I'm looking at ways and places that I could mount a couple of 100 fans, everything cool. On top of that, I was able to modify someone else's handles designed for the front of racks, and I changed it so that it would go on top of the rack to make moving it around a whole lot easier, and it was a good idea. And it also makes it a lot more similar to the Geek Pie rack that inspired all of this in the first place. So I'm looking forward to using this long term. I really like how it looks, really like how it's set up, and I probably will be doing more to it. I've got to flip that whole HDD rack assembly so that it's set up correctly. Now, I also received a Lenovo computer from Moss. Thank you, Moss. I'm going to have to set it up as a set-top box in my living room, but since it's going to have, some added overhead, it's going to have the available overhead. I think I'm going to also install an instance of Nextcloud on it and make sure that it has enough storage for me to be able to do a full backup of my Nextcloud instance. I like having it in multiple places. Since it'll also be directly connected to my router instead of in my garage, I think that I'm going to have my backup WireGuard instance on it, but I think I'm going to use continue using my router as the main WireGuard. Less overhead and seems to be working just fine. I just like having backups. Now, I know I'll probably set up a few other things. I may just Proxmox machine, but one thing at a time. I'll let you guys know when I make up my mind. Back to the Pro Desk, a couple of other things. I have ordered a total of 32 gigabytes of RAM for it, and I'll be installing that. And the AE adapter, like I said, work, but I'm looking at a NVMe adapter, and also have ordered the USB-C to NGFF adapter, and hopefully one of those. Now, when I first installed the primary hard drive, I did install an NGFF M.2. I think that's the reason that I'm not seeing it. I thought I could see it in the BIOS. I thought there were multiple drives there, but maybe my brain's playing tricks on me. So right now it's just set up with a 2.5-inch SSD that I had actually cut down to be able to fit the AE adapter. So the casing on it is cut back because it doesn't fill up much of the space in that case. Now, I had printed an adapter for the 2242 drive that I used to a 2280, and that went on easy enough, but like I said, it wasn't reading it, so I ended up pulling it. I'm assuming that it's because it's NGFF and not NVMe. So I will be looking into what to do next on that. And yes, I will have to take a good portion of the thing apart to fix the HD drive or the HD tray and the 32 gigs of RAM, and possibly to put in the SATA adapter. But that will give me a lot more space than the drive I currently. I'm gonna have fun doing it, and that's really all I've been up to. Well, I say that, But there is so much more that I'm saving for next time. So, Majid?
Yeah, I'll be interested to hear your Proxmox stories, actually.
I'm saving it for when we do
Yeah,
Proxmox as an innard.
yeah. So I should be looking forward to that. One thing I missed, you know, that which Lenovo was it that you got from Moss?
Oh, it's one of the small form factor ones. He
Or like
sent me
ThinkCentre
one.
or something like that.
Yeah, the ThinkCentre Mini or whatever.
Okay.
I haven't opened his box yet because I was working on the rack.
Okay.
So, but if it's the exact same one as the last one, then yeah, it's a ThinkCentre Mini.
Cool. Okay, yes. So my wanderings. So I missed the last episode, and so I haven't been here for a month or so. And so you'd expect I'd have a lot to report and a lot of wandering, but unfortunately, not so much. It's amazing how in modern life you can feel so busy and overwhelmed, or when it comes down to it, there hasn't actually been that much stuff done. I think it's more than quantity. It's about timing. Everything seems to happen at the same time, and today's actually a case in point. Friend of mine's mother passed away. They already had the main funeral already, but they were going to have another service today at exactly the same time as this podcast. Similarly, the other day, I help out with some of the doctors who are having difficulties at work, you know, stress and things like that. And that meeting was at exactly the same time as the time I have to drop my daughter off at taekwondo. You know, everything just seems to happen at the same time. And I think that's what it makes me feel like I'm so busy. But when I actually sit down, I haven't actually done a huge amount. So the reason I wasn't here last time was because I was supposed to be going to Morocco. However, some health problems came up in the family, and so it wasn't really the best idea for me to go while things the way they were at home. I mean, I wouldn't have enjoyed it. I'll tell you that. You know, if I spent the entire time just worrying about what's happening back home, so it's not really going to be a good holiday, is it? The one upshot was with that was number one, there wasn't an earthquake since one of my trips to Morocco. After I came back, there was an earthquake. The other thing was I was actually able to attend the wedding of a childhood friend, which had clashed with the trip. See what I mean about things all happening at the same time. Anyway, maybe I'll go later in the year. My wife hasn't been actually, so maybe I'll be able to. I'll take her, and she would probably enjoy. Anyway, on the Linux front, I did the in-place upgrade to Mint 22.1 Zia. It was probably the most painless update I've ever done on any operating system ever. And I use that line specifically because when I think of any Windows machine, when I think of any Android, when I think of the plethora of hundreds of distros that I've probably got through.
Why aren't you saving this for the innards?
I was going to say, may I suggest that you save this?
Yeah. So anyway, I was just gonna say I'm not gonna say much more about it because we're going to be talking about it in the innards. But all I'll say is that I was very impressed with it. On the other machine, Ubuntu 24.10 is working well. I don't know what's changed recently, but battery life on it seems to have improved with. I'm not sure if it's with 24.10 or with one of the updates to 24.10. I mean, I was wondering maybe if it could be Wayland. I've heard that anecdotally that Wayland is a bit better on system resources compared to X11. I don't know, but I mean, I'm happy about it. But it's yeah. I don't know why. My days with the foldable phone are over. I had an acquaintance who wanted my OnePlus Open and was giving me a good price, which I wouldn't have got really if I sold it out on the market somewhere. Especially since the new Open 2 is coming out next month. So I've gone back to a traditional smartphone. I do miss the ability to use my phone as an e-reader, but that's a really small gripe, to be honest. And it is a very hashtag first world problem. When it came to watching video on that device, because of the aspect ratio, I did realize that the actual video, because of all the letterboxing, 16:9 and all that, even though the canvas was bigger, the actual video wasn't that much bigger than if I was watching it on a normal phone. And so I was often defaulting to just watching stuff on my tablet or my laptop anyway. But it was a fun experiment. It was a fun experiment. With the deals that are going around with the new S25 Ultra, that's what I ended up going for. It was actually cheaper for me to get this with all trade-ins and discounts and promotional offers than to get the S24 Ultra, which is what I had before. I do think that is a better phone. Anybody who's got an S24 Ultra, hang on to it. It's got a better Bluetooth pen. It's got a more distinctive design. You know, there's nothing about the S25 Ultra which, unless you're on like a S21, it's the only reason I can think of someone to get an S25 Ultra. There's no other reason, whatever. I mean, it's a damn good phone. And as I said, with the deals that I was getting for it, I mean, I basically only spent, I think, £150 on it, really. You know, when it all came down to it, when, you know, as I said, with all the promotions and all this kind of stuff, which is not bad for a £1,300 phone. So anyway, it looks like I'm back in the Samsung ecosystem because I do have a Samsung tablet and some Samsung headphones. Although when I did put them back in today, when I went to the gym, I realized that they're not the best headphones in the world. Having been using Sennheisers for the last couple of months. There was no OTC last week due to a variety of factors, but in the episode before that, I had discovered live on the radio during the show that my Synology NAS had got corrupted. I have absolutely no idea why. I had to do a full reinstall of the DSM operating system on it, which, because of the spinning rust hard drive, took a couple of nervous hours. I really thought I'd lost all my data. I hadn't. Obviously, the way that these things are constructed, the data is kept secure from the operating system. 3-1 backups though, because I still had other backups. At least I thought to myself, well, even if I have lost everything, I haven't actually lost everything because I've got it backed up somewhere else. I think it's still a reasonable policy when it comes to the way that you keep your files. I mean, I think Leo on OTC disagreed, I think, with 321. I can't remember. Somebody did. But anyway.
Well, it's not realistic for everybody. I mean, yeah, it's the best way to do it, but I mean, honestly, not everybody can pull it off. In fact, most normal people can't.
True. But if you want that peace of mind, and if you are, I mean, it's actually interesting, because last week I'd gone out with some friends just to a cafe, and I was sat there chatting, and my friend he works for Network Rail, so one of the government subsidiary company, not for profit, which looks after the rail track, so not runs the trains, because that's all privatized, but the rail track is still under the government, but not as a department, as a not-for-profit company. Anyway, long story short, he had a very nice work laptop, and so had been using his very nice work laptop for everything, including all his home stuff. And they had now decided to get a bit more particular with their admin and what files and this, that, and the other, and basically stopped any access to any external media. At which point he basically shat himself because he thought he'd lost. He wouldn't have access to his hard drives, only to find out that they'd all been backed up onto the company's OneDrive, which then really scared him again, because he's like, my personal files are now on a company's OneDrive. So anyway, he managed to get it all off there and whatever. But it was interesting because, as I said, this was kind of happening around the same time as well. And he was like starting to look, I need to have some kind of encrypted backup. I can't just be plugging in this, that, and the other. To which my actual answer was, dude, just buy a decent laptop to do your home stuff on and leave your work stuff for your work stuff. But hey, anyway. And
I would agree with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've never understood it either.
Yeah. Anyway, I did listen to the last episode of mintCast though with some interest, because I've been wanting to put Docker and Jellyfin on this NAS and I was having issues with the compose file. Now that Bill has done a bit more explaining, I'm going to have to do a little bit more tinkering. If that works, great. If not, I might go back to Plex. Oh, Eric, you know that dash cam that I bought? It's still sitting in my room. I still haven't installed it.
Me neither.
Yeah, I've at least got it out of the box, which and downloaded the app. So I've done that at least.
Did you put the card in it and test it like in your room?
Oh, I haven't gone that far yet. No, I haven't gone that far.
Oh, okay.
I haven't got that far yet. Go, slow down there. Slow down.
Sorry. Didn't mean to get ahead of myself there. All the first videos I have of my ceiling, like the ceiling fan. And
did you install yours?
No, this is from when I installed it in my last car before I wrecked it.
Fine.
And then, so.
Okay.
No, I haven't done it. I think I told you where they said they wanted to drop the headliner and like make a huge mess out of it, which to everybody said, no, that sounds wrong. So I need to find the right person to do it.
Okay. I finished going onto television. I finished The Agency. It was really good. Really enjoyed it. Michael Fassbender and all that. Fantastic. There is an Amazon Indian series called Patal Lok, which is on its second season. Well recommended actually to everybody. Very gritty, very interesting stuff. I got through it in a couple of days. Really gripping television. We are still watching Black Doves because of my wife's tardiness. Although I might quietly just do it without her knowing. I'm quite enjoying it. I mean, it's so British, and I love the Welsh assassin. The British listeners might get what I mean, but there's something about the Welsh accent, and I was born in Wales. There's something about the Welsh accent, and when you're talking about, shooting someone, it just sounds really comical. It's brilliant. I can only, I mean, I can't think of an American equivalent, but it's very, very particular. I'm slowly going through Dexter Original Sin. It's all right. Some good bits. Not as interesting as I thought it would be. And there's no jeopardy because you know that everything's fine because there's 7 seasons of it 20 years later. So it's obvious, there's no jeopardy, is there? But it's good to see Christian Slater in TV, which is good. I did start Dark Matter because I heard quite a lot of good reviews of it. Seems very predictable though for something that's supposed to be about like multiple universes and stuff like that. It's like it's like this is so obvious where this is going. I don't know if any of you guys have watched it and have got any thoughts or anything. But anyway, on the music front, I'm eagerly awaiting the new Manic Street Preachers album. It was actually supposed to come out yesterday, but then there's been some delay. I don't know what it is. They are the band that are the soundtrack to my life. You have certain bands that you followed for so many years, and you can think of this album came out when I was at school. This album came out I was at university. This album came out around the time I was getting married. This album came out at the time when I moved. Do you know what I mean? And they've been going on since the late 80s, so they're on to their 15th album now. And I can listen to different songs and think to myself, yes, I remember. It reminds me of my early 20s, or it reminds me of when my son was born, or whatever. There's some new tracks out from the Architects and Memphis May Fire. Memphis? You know what I mean. They've been good. And of course, Bloodywood. They did a collaboration with Baby Metal, which is epic. I mean, it's 3 separate different languages, and it still works. Absolutely excellent stuff. I think I've shared it on our Discord. So yeah, if anybody, so go check that out. Speaking of music, I've been saying about how I've been using Tidal as my streaming thing of choice. The quality is really good, even when you're going through Bluetooth, as we've mentioned before. The music library isn't as extensive as others, especially when you're looking at non-English tracks, but that hasn't been an issue. The app is starting to frustrate though. It's slow. You get random bugs. You get skips for no reason. I thought it was me, but then I looked on the internet and it seems to be a well-known issue. A lot of people have got complaints about it. I'm sticking with it so far because it's manageable. But, I won't be surprised if I get a free trial of something. Maybe Spotify want me to come back or something else. I might jump ship. And in fact, that reminded me that I haven't used Deezer for about 10 years. So I must be due another free trial of it or something. So, why not? Oh, Bill, you were going to do something about changing streaming services, weren't you? And like you were trying to marry up your playlists and all this kind of stuff. Did you do that in the end?
Yeah, well, all I was doing was migrating off of Pandora onto YouTube Music, and the entire reason for that was because I was already paying for YouTube Premium, and you get
Yeah.
YouTube Music for free, and
Yeah.
it's good enough. And the problem I was starting to have was that some music, for licensing reasons, was starting to become unavailable. Stuff that I've had on my playlist for years was starting to become unavailable on Pandora. I've been a part of Pandora since the beginning of the internet, I think.
Did you use any of those kind of tools like Soundees or those kind of web tools for transferring playlists over and stuff?
So the problem with those tools that I found out real early on was when, like in my case, I listened to a lot of, you wouldn't know it, but I listened to a lot of European EDM. It's kind of my thing.
Oh.
And the problem with those is with using a tool with that kind of music is that there is like a dozen different mixes for every one of these songs, and it doesn't always get the right version of the song that I want. So in the end, I did have to go through, but I was able to. It took half a day, but I was able to find the parody of each song on YouTube.
Yeah,
Music.
I mean, I remember noticing that actually as well. Like you'd get a specific, I don't know, a cover version of a song, for example, that's done by a specific artist, and then when you're transferring it, you'll just get the original.
Right.
Like that. When I actually really wanted the cover because I quite liked the cover, or whatever. Okay, cool. And we would now go to Eric, but Eric says he's done nothing of anything worth mentioning in any way, shape, or form. So he just said, skip me. Is that still the case, or have you thought of something in the last 45 minutes or whatever?
No, I
Or
have
2
not.
hours?
Nope.
Okay.
I was just going to skip
you
him
kid-
without saying anything if he didn't say something. But yeah.
No, I just thought I just thought I should just give him the chance to kind of, make sure. I mean, it's always nice to see Eric alive and like.
You thought you'd call him out.
True.
That's what it
It's
was.
true.
I'm
You
not
busted
calling
him
it
out in front of
out.
everybody.
You called him out.
He did.
I'm not calling. I can call you out if you want me to.
And I called him
Yeah.
out for calling him out.
Yeah, mate, you don't know what calling out is. I invented calling out.
All right. Well,
Your mom.
that was a rather in-depth. Without Eric participating, it was rather in-depth. So
See, the reality of this is that Eric had the most exciting, interesting time as a secret agent, but because of this,
he's not allowed to talk about it.
He's not allowed to talk about it, and so he just kind of just says, I didn't
In
do
fact,
anything
we're saying too much
noteworthy
right now.
whatsoever. Yeah,
Nope. Haven't left the house. Nope. Mom's the word. Nothing's happened.
yeah,
Right on.
done absolutely nothing whatsoever.
All right. So about enough of that. Right. Let's move on to the Linux innards. We had a conversation. We didn't really have a round table. Well, we did. We just didn't stream it last weekend because I was
I was looking for that actually.
well,
Where's it?
I was like in the middle of Tennessee trying to make my way back, so I couldn't stream it, and I think Joe was caught off guard by that because I didn't say anything until it was probably too late to get it all up and
2
running.
minutes before the round table.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
Plus, there wasn't a whole lot of us there, and
so we got
Yeah.
it was me and Joe and Eric, and we got to talking about some possible things to talk about, and I think one topic that is worth reimagining or going into from time to time is this whole conversation, this whole contentious conversation around upgrading in place versus nuke and pave, and it's relevant right now just mostly because of the recent release of Mint 22.1.
And I think it's also important because, not important, I think it's also interesting because Mint has been very much from the beginning, don't upgrade. They've been very much of a, philosophically, they've been, if you've got a system that works and is doing what you need it to do, just leave it as it is. That's what Clem used to say back in the day. And I think which is a refreshing difference if you think about it. Every other manufacturer, distro, whatever you want to say, always wants to get the newest hotness. Get the latest version of Android, get the latest version of Ubuntu, download Service Pack 2 back in the day, get, the whatever version of Windows we're on now, right? And at that time, it was refreshing because Clem was like, yeah, if it works, if it ain't broke, don't try and fix it. And so for a long time, you couldn't actually upgrade easily in place. And so if you wanted to move on to the newer version of Mint specifically, you would have to do it, what they call the new compave, basically, do a fresh install all the way from the beginning, which is fine for distro hoppers and nerds like us probably, but isn't necessarily the thing that the normies do. And it's also not normally mentioned a lot by the other distros. You can correct me if I'm wrong on this one, right? But how many other distros go around saying, don't bother upgrading, leave it the way it is, but if you do want to move to the new one, just destroy everything and start from the beginning? Now, the interesting thing about that is that with this release of Mint, we do have, we've had in-place upgrades for a while, but this in-place upgrade,
not for very long.
No, not for long.
Not
for long, but we have had them. This specific upgrade has quite a lot of changes on the back end.
Yeah.
Right? And I'm just going to say my experience, it was unbelievably easy. It is as I said, I know people are going to say, oh, you're all Mint fanboys because you're on the mintCast podcast. It's like, well, yeah, okay, fine. I suppose that's partially true. But, I think objectively speaking, an upgrade that happens in place that takes about 10 minutes without anything breaking is something to be impressed by.
And this particular
especially on something like Linux.
This particular one didn't take much longer, really, than just a regular software upgrade.
Yeah. No, I've done the upgrade on a couple of computers now, and including one of my tablets. And the upgrade is super easy and super smooth. But I do want to say that I've also noticed that on some of the machines where I have done multiple upgrades, I've noticed a lot of slowing down of the whole system. Like my tablet basically wouldn't stream things anymore, and it's a set time, and it just wasn't doing its job anymore. However, when I turned around and nuked and paved and put in the exact same operating system that was on there previously and installed the exact same programs that were on there before in the exact same way, it just works. It works fine and it works smooth. So I don't know if it's config issues, the difference in the versions with different configurations.
Yeah, I was going to ask why you think that is, because it's something that back in the Windows days, you get all this kind of registry cruft and stuff that would kind of accumulate. I would have thought Linux would be better at that sort of stuff.
Yeah, like I said, I don't know what the actual issue was, but I do know that nuking fixed the problem for me. I almost thought it would have been, like, as slow as it was running, a hardware issue, like a hard drive had gone bad or the RAM had gone. But no, exact same hardware, just nuke and pave, and it works. So, and I have noticed that on like this computer as well. It used to do Discord, OBS, Firefox, the whole streaming setup, and it had no issues with it. But the last time I did it, I noticed some stuttering in my whole system because I saw the stuttering. I brought up System Monitor, and my CPU was maxing out, and it really shouldn't be. It's an i7. I think it's like 6th gen or something like that, or 8th. No, it's 8th gen. And it should not be an issue running all of that at all. But it still was. So eventually what I'm going to do, I'm also wipe this out and start over and see if that fixes the problem. Because I also did the upgrades on this machine. So, I mean, for the longest time, I was a nuke and pay. You know, I still have the habits of storing all my data separate from my operating system hard drive because of doing that in the past. mintCast is the reason I started using upgrades so that I could come in and give reviews about those upgrades. And I can nuke pave and be up and running again in, well, it'll take more time than the upgrade for sure, but it still is not an onerous project in this
15, 20
instance.
minutes, isn't it? Let's be honest,
Yeah.
15, 20 minutes.
Yeah, it's more of a problem on my server, which, like last time, I went the upgrade path for almost a decade. Like, I did not nuke and pave it for a really super long time. I even moved the hard drive with everything on it from one machine to another machine. But eventually, I ended up having to nuke and pave, and that just took forever for me to get everything the way that I wanted it, the way that I use it. So, yeah.
Okay.
So
But that's anecdotal.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's interesting because it's been my opinion for a long time, and still really is, that eventually you are going to run into, you're going to run up against a brick wall, and your best bet is to nuke and pave on any system. And it's all to do with the cruft that builds up of configurations and things. And as software updates, really the default method of diffing, automatically diffing from one configuration to the new configuration is to merge the configurations together, but don't change anything about the already set configurations. The reason it's set that way is because the update process does not know whether these were previously default settings or are these settings the user changed because it fit their particular use case. And I can understand why it works that way, but over time, you're eventually, just because of the way software changes the way it works, you're going to run into problems because of that and lots of other reasons. And just, especially if you're the kind of person that plays with software a lot. I would imagine the kind of person that sits at the same machine and never installs anything new, never tries anything new, just uses their browser, uses the software that's installed on it, never changes anything, never messes with anything. Perhaps you could get by for a decade, like Joe said, a decade or better without doing a nuke and pave, because there's really not much changing. But you are going to, I guarantee, you are going to notice a considerable boost in performance by doing that nuke and pave eventually. So there's going to be use cases for both. In my case, the last couple of updates have been in place just because I have not had the time to go through and reset up all of the software and all of the little things that I've got on my desktop, that are far and wide beyond what is the default of what you get when you install Mint on your machine. I just haven't had time to do that, so I've installed in place. I'm looking forward in the next couple weeks to doing the nuke and pave, because I want to move to the new ButterFS thing now that I know that it works well. because I know that I'm going to see some performance boost when I do that, just because it just cleans things up. Now you go to another distribution. We were talking about other distributions. Mint is not only are we like the type of distribution to where we have, I don't want to use the word snapshot, but we have major releases. We have a major release cycle, and it's very much based on Ubuntu's LTS, which is slow moving for a lot of software, but well curated for the security updates. In stark contrast to that is something like, I don't know, Gen 2 or, let's see, what's Tumbleweed? The OpenSUSE project, Tumbleweed. These are distributions. There's one other out there. I can't think of the name of it. That's very much up to date all the time. Rolling distro. I don't know. These kind of distributions are giving you up-to-date software every time you run the update command. And I mean every piece of software that's installed on that system, right down to the core utils, every little thing on there. And so the argument is that you're getting a brand new system basically all the time. There is no major release cycle, so there's never any need to do a nuke and pave. And my argument has always been, you're going to eventually run into the exact same problem where cruft builds up, in spite of the fact. In fact, you might run into that problem more on a rolling release, because you are getting more of that concept I was talking about of changes, major changes, and the diffs get. When I say diffs, I mean when a configuration file with the new updated piece of software comes down and it gets merged with the old configuration file, and there's new settings that might conflict with the old settings if they're turned on or off a certain way. It's the exact same scenario. And in fact, with a rolling release, you might run into it more often, in theory. So the occasional nuke and pave, in my opinion, is probably very appropriate no matter what kind of distribution you're using. But again, a lot of this is opinion, but a lot of it is opinion based on experience, because, a good distribution should be able to last a very long time by updating in place, because nuke and pave is just, I can imagine a lot of scenarios where it's just not an option for people. It's just, you just cannot down the machine long enough to perform this update for one reason or another.
Well, and nuke and pave is also obviously very destructive.
Yeah.
You're losing all of your configuration files and things unless you have your home directory as a separate partition, potentially. The thing that I do... No, go ahead.
But if you have your home directory as a separate, and I've done that before, it is a good idea. But that saves a lot of your configurations, too, and that can lead to the same issues that Bill was talking about.
Yeah. Well, so I basically... I don't know, the approach I took years ago, and I still hold to this, is all of my data. So when you look in the normal sort of structure of a Linux home folder, so you've got your desktop documents, downloads, music, all the normal set of folders. Those are all on a different disk for me. So all of my actual user data is on a separate partition completely. And then that means that the operating system and all the config files are under a single partition. And that way, if I have to nuke and pave, I still at least have all of my data. And I also do backups of specific configuration files, like, your bash RC and just stuff where you've made configuration changes and customizations. And so that really makes it easy to just simply redeploy, the underlying operating system, and then you can change it out at that point too. It doesn't even matter, and be able to just put all of that stuff right back. And within half an hour at the most, you've got yourself, a fresh system. So I'm never too worried about losing anything. And I will definitely say that if you continue to either upgrade, in perpetuity or keep installing new, well, the worst thing you can do, I think personally, is to have multiple desktops on the same base. So you've got Ubuntu, and then you can, if there's no reason why you can't have Ubuntu and install KDE on top of it, and then have them both there. There's potentially conflicts and things, but I tried that in the past, and that's a nightmare. So
it gets
okay, you
real
don't wanna do
weird.
that.
It gets real
It does.
weird.
It does. So
I've
you really
done
don't
that,
want to.
and it actually has, saved me from a lot of work in the past.
Really?
Because like recently, Cinnamon, I don't know what happened to Cinnamon on my server, and I usually run Cinnamon. It just stopped working. It would not work at all. And so I switched over to, what was it, Mate, and reinstalled Cinnamon, and made it work fine.
I think I just dropped to a
I could have,
virtual
yeah, I
terminal
could have
and-
dropped to a
yeah.
terminal and installed it that. But I wasn't ready to do that right then. I was working on something at the time, so it was easier for me to log out of the Cinnamon session, log into the Mate, finish what I was doing, and then install Cinnamon again, and then switch back over. And my configs were still there.
Now I have had situations where it kind of helped to have like a alternative file manager installed, like something weird like Sunflower or Midnight Commander or something like that works in the terminal. That way, if something weird was going on with the desktop, which I've not experienced. Well, okay, so Cinnamon in the beginning was a bit ropey when it first came out, and I had situations where I had some XFCE tools installed because they were the ones that pulled they would pull the fewest dependencies of any of them out there. Like if you try to install like Nautilus or something, it pulls the entire GNOME desktop basically, and the same with Dolphin. If you try to install those, you get a lot of the dependencies that go along with that. So I could see where you're coming from with that. And then you're also in panic mode too, because so dropping to the terminal can sometimes be a little unwieldy when you're worried about losing everything you were working on,
And there are other reasons to keep multiple desktop GUIs. Like if I'm spinning something off with X to go, I don't necessarily want to do it with Cinnamon. I'd rather do it with Mate,
Yeah.
LXQT, or something a little bit lighter weight, and something that I can change the configuration on without messing with the configuration that I have set up for Cinnamon.
So yeah, what do you think, Majid? What do you usually land on by
So,
default?
partly because I'm such a distro hopper, I do find myself doing a lot of nuking and paving, because that thing that Joe was saying about, getting the kind of the slowdowns and the cruft and the bloat, if you want to call it that, as well. That is something I've noticed as well. I don't know why it happens. Again, I used to wonder if it was my hardware or things like that, because initially anyway, a lot of the Linux boxes I had were slightly underpowered compared to some of the Windows boxes I had. And so, in a sense, I have done that. I have nuke and paved because I've just decided, okay, I'm going to distro hop now. I'm going to try something else. I'm going to go on to this. So I'm just going to do a fresh install, isn't it? This thing about having your files separate, like Eric was mentioning. So I have on occasion done the whole separate partition for home and separate partition for root.
I do something that's even easier.
Well, I was
All
going
I
to
do
say
is make. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, but I found that actually the easiest thing to do was to have the documents and stuff that I wanted, the important stuff, on something else. So a hard drive. a NAS as it is now, cloud storage, something like that. That way, I wouldn't have to mess around with any of that. And when I wanted my documents, well, I already had them all backed up to the cloud anyway. I just would have a desktop client. As I've mentioned in the past, I've used a variety of them. Mega is the one that I'm using at the moment. I really want to use Proton Drive, but they still haven't got a Linux client, and the whole rclone syncing thing, or at least I haven't got it to work. But anyway, but yeah, and so by having my files and things somewhere else and having my media somewhere else and all this kind of stuff, I don't really need to have a separate home partition and stuff like that. You know, I can just do a full real nuke and pave, destroy everything that's on the machine. And with this podcasting box anyway, I mean, I don't even dual boot Windows or anything on it. So if I get bored, you know, so I mean, this has already run Elementary and Aurora and Ubuntu, various flavors of Ubuntu. And now it's running Mint at the moment. Yeah, sorry, Eric, what were you saying?
All roads lead to Mint, as usual.
All roads definitely lead to Ubuntu, I'll tell you that. Something Ubuntu-based. That's for a start, definitely. Which specific flavor depends. But
Well,
Yeah.
No, you guys were talking about having stuff on separate partitions. Like I said, I've done that with my home before, but I don't do it anymore. The only similar thing that I do now is with my downloads directory, is I will have that on a separate drive, specifically because I want that. I download a lot of things to test things out, to try things out, STLs, different things, and I don't want that filling up my smaller, faster operating system drive. Because yes, I do want it running on an M.280, but those can get expensive. So I buy when I was buying them, they were more expensive. So I was buying the lower storage capacity drives that had the higher speeds, but I was making sure that everything else that didn't need to be there was on larger, slower drives.
ButterFS is your friend when it comes to this because, like in my case, you've got this concept of sub-volumes on ButterFS that you can mount to each directory in a separate sub-volume mounted to each directory that you want to back up on you want to be mounted on a different device. And the reason that's nicer than creating separate partitions, like, you know, the old way of doing it would be like to create a partition for your home directory. Well, you have to specify a particular size for each directory that you want, or each file system that you want to be mounted to each directory. With ButterFS, you can just create subvolumes, and these are very arbitrary. You can set quotas, or you can set reserves for these, but it's not necessary. They're just separate subvolumes that can be mounted separately. So, like in my case, excuse me, I have separate storage for the downloads, like Joe was describing, for the exact same reason, and then for my videos folder. And then by far the biggest folder is my production folder, which has all of the working files for all of these shows in it. And I can really go quickly from one installation to the next simply by copying and pasting I keep a copy of my FS tab on my GitHub page, so I can copy and paste that and go quickly from one install to another. And it doesn't require you can have all of these separate, they're kind of like partitions, but the difference is you don't have to specify a size for them. You don't have to actually set aside a predetermined amount of space on a hard drive for them. Like I said, it's arbitrary. So it's worth learning. Something like ButterFS or even ZFS has the exact same concept with the instead of using subvolumes, they call them data sets within the pool, and it's almost the exact same concept, where you can create separate spaces that can be mounted to all these separate directories in your home directory. Now, that whole concept of doing the entire home directory, I used to do that as well, and I stopped doing it for the exact same reason as I was talking about with the building cruft, because that home directory is where your cache directory, your .cache, and your .config is, and it's the exact same thing. You're going to get a lot of cruft built up in those directories over time. Yes, it's easy just to copy that over, and then when you start up your machine, everything will look exactly the way it did before you started the upgrade process. But in a lot of ways, you might as well have just updated in place, because you've carried over all a good percentage of your cruft from the old machine or the old installation to the new installation. So
Yeah, I used to do that where I'd just leave my home, basically install over top instead of reformatting, and it was just a nightmare. It was always a mess. Like something would not work properly, and it was because of some errant config file, or yeah, it was just not a good idea. And I didn't do it for very long. That was when I was really new, and but since then, I think it stands to reason that just about any operating system. I mean, maybe people keep macOS and never reinstall it, but most people I know tend to eventually have to reinstall Windows, and that was always something that I did every couple years, just simply because it got so slow you couldn't use it. But I found sort of the same thing with Linux, and yeah, you probably could coax it out and just deal with things as they come up. But ultimately, I think just a good nuke and pave every now and then, whenever you have the time and energy to do it.
I remember how terrifying the whole idea of nuking and paving a Windows installation was, before before I had a concept of what file systems were and how that all worked. But
even after, it's so daunting because you have to reinstall it. I mean, I don't want to go off on a tangent here, but I mean, the last time I set up Windows from scratch, I mean, it was hours of like getting stuff. Every single thing is an individual package or downloaded, install file, and oh my goodness, and there are package managers now. I mean, there's Chocolatey and Winget and some different things that make it a little easier, but it's doing the same thing, just automating it for you. It's going to get that executable installer, running it in the background, so it still takes a long time. And is a very slow, like one by one kind of process versus, I come back to this argument every time that I talk about this, that I still contend that it's easier to manage a Linux system, especially for a non-technical person, where there's just like on Mint, where just updates, you could set it to automatically do it, or you just have them do it every so often, or you go in and do it every so often, for them if it's a family member, and it's just easier.
It's a huge contradiction, isn't it? Because Windows has added so much abstraction in order to make it easier for normal people, palatable for normal people. So much in place to automate everything that it's made it more difficult to administer if you was to need to do so. And in stark contrast, with Linux, it's all right there, either in the kernel or in our case in the Linux firmware package, and in most cases your hardware is getting recognized and everything's getting installed automatically. If not, there's tools that run to make sure you have the right firmware, right software. So we are spoiled a little bit by the simplicity of our, how Linux can be administered in contrast to Windows. Because it was worse in the XP on into the 7. It seemed to be around about the 7 and 8 era is when getting drivers and things started to become a little bit easier, I think. Prior to that, if you bought a machine, it would also come with either CD-ROMs or whatever before that had all the drivers that machine needed. Because
and they also come with recovery partitions, didn't they?
Yeah,
They still do.
And a lot of that is very specific to the vendor that you bought the machine from, and I'm fairly certain a lot of that still exists. And that's another thing. The vendors, they'll put on their silly little software that is doing the exact same thing that Windows already has tools installed to do automatically, but it's maybe not.
Yeah, you can actually, if you buy a laptop from the Microsoft website, you can buy a Microsoft Signature Edition, which basically means it's plain vanilla Windows with none of the crapware that Lenovo or Asus or whatever puts on, which is kind of ironic, really, isn't it?
Yeah, buying a gateway in the late 90s, you
Oh
were
God.
just about guaranteed to get so much fluffware that the thing was practically unusable.
Yeah, but it already had AOL on it. I didn't have to go and find one of those discs laying around and install it. It was a bit of a shortcut. Or what was the other thing we had? Net Zero.
You know what I miss, and I'm being completely facetious here.
Yeah, I was gonna say
toolbars.
Oh,
browser
Where you couldn't
toolbars.
see your actual screen because
Oh my gosh.
every place you went
It'd
to
be
had
this
some
much
little
browser
secret thing
toolbar.
where you clicked on it and you installed another toolbar. And
I remember going, if somebody was having a problem with their computer, I remember going to their house and I would open their Internet Explorer, and that would have toolbars just stacked up half your screen deep, and I would say, well, there's part of your problem right there. And you go, first thing you do is you go into their installed programs and you start getting rid of stuff. And the people would get real nervous when you would start doing these things. Like, hey, you called me over here to fix this. These are the obvious problems that we can get out of the way right now. And that's, and that is still a thing. Maybe not the toolbars, but that whole concept of sneaking stupid little software in when you're installing something free. The worst culprit that I can think of right now is FileZilla. If you go and install FileZilla on Windows, the default method, it tries to employ 3 different methods of sneaking stupid little ancillary software in, just by trying to trick you into not seeing something and then trying another thing where it hides the button, or it puts the button to install where the next button was on the previous window. And it's kind of egregious, I think, especially for open source software to do something like that. But that's the kind of thing that still exists to this day on Windows that you will not see on Linux ever, because, well, one reason is we wouldn't tolerate it. For another, that's just not how we normally install software. We don't have that next concept really with Linux. Maybe with some things, but not quite to the degree Windows has. And so the nuke and pay process on Windows is still kind of a terrifying concept, even more so than on Linux. I think have we just gotten a little bit more used to it? I don't know. Or do we is it almost kind of exciting to start up that machine, get that nice fresh desktop, and the fact that we've got to reset some things back up is kind of something that we put up with,
I want to say that honestly, I like Pop! OS simply because, this is a little reductive, but mainly because it just does everything that I would normally do anyway to GNOME. So it's going to give me the toolbar and the dock and everything that I usually will set up, like I say. And then of course, some of the System 76 add-ons or extensions are, pretty good quality of their own, of course, like the power control and stuff like that. But it saves me so much time. And of course, yes, we're talking maybe a half an hour of installing extensions and configuring them. But that gets really annoying. And the fact that Pop! OS does it, and that, at the end of the day, that's kind of what a distribution is, right? If you know enough about Linux, you can go get Arch or whatever you want that's bare bones and build it up to be anything you want it to be. But that all takes time, and are you really willing to do that? And that's why a distribution can be such a nice breath of fresh air. Like, you install it and you're like, oh, that's really thoughtful. I like the way they have that set up. Or, I like these you know, the way that this is I've never seen it like that before, you know, and that's kind of what's cool about a distro.
Is there
Not
any
just-
distro that has VLC like built in?
I'm sure there's some smaller one that probably does, but I don't think any of the major ones do.
Because I know none of them have Chrome built in. I gotta go get that every time too.
Yeah.
Well, that requires you to have.
Why the hell would he want Chrome?
A lot of
Chrome
people
is
do.
remote desktop probably.
It's usually like the first thing. Some people they'll use Firefox to go get their Chrome because that's where all their bookmarks and everything is, and they've been backing up, and that's what's on your Android phone. So, you know, the whole process of, I mean, that can be almost as daunting as changing operating systems. You know, going from one browser to the next. It was in my case, eventually, it was just a process of wanting to try to de-Google my life as much as I could. So. I mean, that's a reality that we deal with. But anyway, have we taken that topic as far as we can go for now?
That horse has been flogged.
Yeah. I guess we'll go ahead and move on then. Vibrations from the ether. We've not gotten any sort of communication from anybody. We really appreciate input from the community. This show
please,
is,
guys, please, you know, we need someone to tell us what we're doing right or wrong or brilliantly or fantastically or rubbishly.
Or
you know,
what you want to hear about. Let us know.
exactly. If there's a topic that you're interested in, and don't be afraid of sounding stupid, because nobody is stupider about this stuff than I am. Trust me.
Yeah, you're right about that.
I mean, thank you.
Sorry. Couldn't resist that, seriously. Sorry.
It really is. Sometimes I wonder if people are just afraid of sounding pedantic or...
Look, if you're worried about that, then simply say in your correspondence, don't mention my name.
Yeah.
And then we won't.
Yep, right on. We'll just take all the credit for it. Because it'll be brilliant either way. We'll figure out a way. So yeah, let us know, you know, what you're thinking. Because a couple of things. We say that this is the podcast by the Linux community for all users of Linux. Well, we really, really mean that. We want this show to be about the community. We want it to be kind of the voice of the community. And we want to talk about things, most of all, we want to talk about things that are relevant to the community, to everybody that uses Mint, or, you know, not necessarily Mint, but any distribution of Linux whatsoever. What is important to you? What are the things that you're worried about? What are the things that you hope for in the future? We love all that stuff, and we would appreciate any of that input. Another thing, on the weekends opposite of the show, the live stream, we do a secondary show called Roundtable, and that's where it really becomes it should become more community driven, because everyone is invited. All you have to do is have Discord, and you can run Discord either from the Electron app or right in a browser, and you can join the conversation. We do that show in a public voice channel where anyone can join in and it's almost like Linux Saloon. If a lot of people have heard of that show, it's on the Destination Linux channel, and just about anybody can join in. And it doesn't really matter the quality of your microphone or camera, and some people don't even really have a camera. Just join in the conversation and talk with us.
If you want to be a host on mintCast, that is a great place to start. Or if you want to podcast, but you haven't before and you want to test things out, that's also a great place to start, and come on and talk to us, and we will happily talk your ear off.
And that is my origin story right there. I mean, everything I do.
Same here.
Yeah, and it all started with mintCast. So if if you ever had the weird dream of becoming a podcaster at all, or if you've got a lot of opinions about Linux, because Linux is a very opinion-driven, contentious topic and about a lot of things, come talk to us, and you never know. You never know what might happen. So, yeah. But at any rate, connect with us. We are on. We're not on Twitter or whatever it's called, but we are on. We are on Discord. We are on. We've got a Facebook page. I do try to keep. I'll put a notification out when we're getting ready to stream on the Facebook page, if that's your thing. But Discord is where I spend the most time. There's a Telegram channel too. I've got that on my desktop here. I do not have Telegram on my phone. I'm not crazy about it, but I know it's popular for a lot of people. Reach out.
I jump on when I can.
Yeah. And Moss is on there a lot. Moss is taking a bit of a hiatus. I'm hoping he'll be back in the next couple of episodes, but we'll see about that. But yeah, reach out and get a hold of us. We'd love to hear from you either way. Anyway, enough about that. Moving on to check this out. We've got nothing for check this out, so we will move swiftly on to housekeeping and announcements. Thank you for listening to this episode of mintCast. If you see something you think we should talk about, tell us. Send us an email, mintcast@mintcast.org. Join us live on YouTube. Post at the mintcast subreddit. Chat with us on Telegram and Discord, or post directly at mintcast.org. Next episode will be 2 p.m. U.S. Central Time on Sunday, February 16th, 2025. There's a link in the show notes to get that converted to your time zone. Next roundtable live stream will be 2 p.m. U.S. Central Time on Saturday, February 8th, 2025. And there's a link in the show notes to get that converted to your time zone. Next roundtable live stream will be 2 p.m. U.S. Central Time on Saturday, February 22nd, 2025. There's a link to get that converted to your time zone in the show notes. Live stream information is at mintcast.org/livestream. Wrapping up, Joe, where can we get more of you?
Well, I'm on a couple of other podcasts. I'm on the Linux Link Tech Show, which is at tllts.org. I'm on the Linux Lugcast with Eric sometimes. It's at linuxlugcast.com. You can send me an email directly, jb@mintcast.org, or you can buy me a coffee on Ko-fi. Link in the show notes.
Moss couldn't be
Bill.
with us. You can get a hold of us, or get a hold of him at Full Circle Weekly News. There's a link to that in the show notes. You can email him, moss@bodielinux.com. His Mastodon is @Zyvola@hosttux.social, and he is occasionally on HPR. And if you're crazy enough to be interested in me, you can email me. I'm bill@mintcast.org. I'm bill_H on Discord, @WCHauser3, @fostodon.org on the Mastodon. Also, check out my other two shows. I'm on Linux OTC with Eric and Majid, and Three Fat Truckers. Majid?
So you can get hold of me on drmajid.mintcast.org. I'm also at atypical_doctor at mastodon.social, atypicaldoctor on Instagram and Blue Sky now, and Threads. And the Atypical Doctor podcast on Spotify, which I really need to do another episode on, because it's been about 18 months. And also with Eric, Bill, and Leo on Linux OTC. Eric?
I keep things simple and just have a single email address. You can reach me at eric@mintcast.org.
Before we leave, we want to make sure to acknowledge some of the people who make mintCast possible. This is always an awkward thing for me to get through. I do the audio editing for the show, and I host the servers which run the website. I do the website maintenance and run the Nextcloud server in which we host our show notes and raw audio. We want to thank archive.org for hosting our audio files, Hobstar for our logo, and NetRD for the animated Discord logo, Londoner for our time syncs, and all of the various other contributions. I've said it 1,000 times. I'll never stop saying it. It cannot be overstated. Most of all, the Linux Mint development team for the fine distro we love to talk about. Thanks, Clem.
Thanks, Clem.
Thanks, Clem. And Co.
And wrap. Thanks, everybody in the live stream. See you next time.
Did you have many in the live stream?
It went back and forth from 8 to 9.
Well, Paul's been on talking most of the time.
Yeah.